On today's episode, Dr. Liz and I welcome relationship and sex therapist Dr. Emily Jamea to the show, and we dive into one of the most challenging and enjoyable aspects of couple connection, sexual intimacy. Emily shares the 5 secrets for improving your sexual relationship connection that come from her new book, Anatomy of Desire. Dr. Emily Jamea is an award-winning sex and relationship therapist and USA Today bestselling author of Anatomy of Desire, 5 Secrets to Create Connection and Cultivate Passion. She's a sought-after keynote speaker who presents nationally and internationally to educators, health professionals, corporate leaders, and the public. Her expertise has been featured in outlets like Oprah Magazine, CNN, USA Today, and NBC. Emily also offers online workshops to make her work widely accessible and is a multi-award-winning columnist for healthy women. In 2025, she was named an Outstanding Woman in Medicine by the Arts of Healing Foundation. When she's not working, Emily enjoys time with her husband and children, traveling, salsa dancing, and painting. We hope you enjoy the show. Hey there, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Stronger Marriage Connection podcast. I'm Dr. Dave here at Utah State. Alongside our psychologist, Dr. Liz Hale, we are bringing you the very best that we have in research and resources, along with a few tips and tools to help you create the marriage of your dreams. Hey, today, Liz, is going to be exciting. We're exploring the science of desire, what it is, how it works, and how couples can nurture it over time. Our guest, Dr. Emily Jamea, is a nationally recognized sex and relationship therapist and the author of Anatomy of Desire, 5 Secrets to Create Connection and Cultivate Passion. Can't wait to dive into that with her. She's here to share research-based insights and practical tools to help couples strengthen intimacy, even in the middle of busy, demanding lives. Welcome to the show, Dr. Emily.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here with you both today.
Likewise. Thank you.
Yes, we are. Hey, before we dive too deep into these are pretty deep waters, right? What we're going to get into, very important topic. I'm curious, can you tell us a bit about your own journey? What prompted you to become a sex and relationship therapist?
Sure. So it probably started earlier than I realized. I grew up in a very small conservative town in Southeast Tennessee. My dad was an OB-GYN though. So in my household, sex was not a taboo topic. I heard him on the phone talking about everything. And so it was something I was comfortable with. But I think as I, was entering adolescence, it became apparent that that was not the case for the majority of my peers. And this is kind of, we had the internet, but it's not like it was today. And so they started coming to me with questions because I had the answers. And so I was probably giving sex advice before I was qualified to do so. But then fast forward, I was studying psychology at the University of Texas and took a human sexuality just as an elective and found it fascinating. I think that understanding someone's sexuality is such an interesting window into the psyche, and you can learn so much about the inner workings of an individual by understanding how they experience sexuality and what that means to them. And I think, I realized it's such an important part of relationships. And at the time, there weren't that many people specializing at it. I live in Houston now, which is a city of, over 4 million people. And when I hung up my shingle, I think I was one of 3 certified sex therapists. And there was a huge demand. I mean, people were just, really invested in improving that area of their relationship. And so that's how that was the beginning of my path.
Yeah, love it. Such an important topic. Yeah, we need more of you, it sounds like, out there to keep up.
No, it's getting better, but we still have a long way to go.
Yeah.
You are probably not without a dearth, right, of clients.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine. So, yeah, good for you, Emily. If we could just multiply you, that's what we need now. You're right. So please tell us a little bit about the research and the study that you did, please, and what you discovered.
Sure. So at the time I started doing the research, I'd been working as a sex and relationship therapist for over a decade. And, I could help people to an extent overcome, issues around erectile dysfunction or orgasm and desire and could get people so far, but reached a point where, I always schedule an accountability session just to kind of see how people are doing. And they would say things like, yeah, we've more or less met our goals, but we're craving a bit more intensity. We want it to feel, even more passionate like it did in the honeymoon phase. And I started paying closer attention to the specific language that they were using to describe the sex they want. Words like effortless. I want to feel lost in the moment. I want the world around me to disappear. And I was like, oh, they're using flow state language. So for your listeners who might not know what a flow state is, it's a decades-old term coined by this American-Hungarian psychologist named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Say that 3 times fast. And flow state is the term he used to describe the state of mind we enter when we are so fully absorbed in an activity that we experience kind of a dilution of time. It can feel like it speeds up or slows down. The activity has our, full and complete attention. We experience a sense of merger, like a surfer who's at one with the wave. And I'm like, yeah, of course, those are the kinds of feelings people want to have when they make love. And I was familiar with flow. And then I looked in the research to see what I could find about flow in relation to sex. And there was nothing. Csikszentmihalyi kind of briefly mentions it in one of his books. There was one study I found that looked at couples who practice BDSM and kind of getting in like transcendental states. And, that was as close as I could find. And so I was like, wow, there's a real opportunity here to see, if and how people can experience a state of flow during sex. Because I think that's what a lot of people would like to tap into. And so that's what inspired the study.
Yeah. I love it. I'm familiar with, Mihai and the term and flow. And I love that. But again, me too. I had never actually put those two together. So yeah, beautiful work. Good for you.
Yeah. Thank you. It was a really fun study. I recruited a bunch of individuals. They had to be in a relationship for more than 1 year because I wanted to rule out the honeymoon phase. That stuff is easy. It's neurochemically driven. I was like, okay, I want to get past that. I was particularly interested in couples who had figured out how to sustain the passion. They had to be over 25. Again, I didn't want like hormone, young adult hormone driven sex. I wanted kind of more mature couples who evolved beyond that. And they couldn't be pregnant or have a baby under the age of 1 because, parents, we know how that can throw a wrench. Probably would have skewed my data. And then, I looked at the numbers and that alone was a huge win. I found that there was a really strong link between how sexually satisfied someone reported to feel and what they said about their ability to get into a flow state. And then I found that getting into a flow state actually predicted how satisfied they were. So there was, we could move a little bit beyond just, correlation and look at causation, which in, data and, behavioral science is really exciting. And so what I did then is I called up the people who had the highest scores and had really long conversations with them about, specifically what it was like for them and what they did to get there. And it was through those conversations that these 5 themes emerged, which then set the foundation for the book.
Ooh. And that's where Anatomy of Desire comes in. Did I get that right?
That's right.
Okay. Excellent. So what inspired you to write this at the time? I mean, I obviously you had this great data.
I did. And, I think we are living in a time where we want to optimize everything in life. We want to work smarter, not harder. We're investing in our health and wellness. And, people don't want their sex lives to take a back seat. I think we have, come so far in terms of women feeling, empowered to assert themselves sexually and to express what they want and desire. And, they're no longer just along for the ride. We don't want to have sex just out of a feeling of obligation. They want to feel connected. They want to experience flow. And of course, I'm not the first person to write a book on long-term passion, but I think what makes the book unique is, the foundation of flow and kind of the structure that provides. Because I think once you understand flow state, it's not a big leap. to apply the central tenets to your sex life. And that's exactly what the people in my study did.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
Let's dive in a little bit without giving away the entire book. But I mean, is there, maybe if you had to pick one, is there a secret, to have better sex? Our listeners are like, okay, yeah, what is it that she found? How can I use it? What would that be?
So there are 5 secrets. I'll just outline, I'll kind of say what they are, and then I'll answer your question. So it's sensuality, curiosity, adaptability, vulnerability, and attunement. And if I had to pick one, it would probably be curiosity. Because we know from other research that novelty is a key predictor in long-term passion. And so the curiosity chapter explores that. But again, I think it does so from a little bit of a different angle than what people are used to. So in flow state, we have something called the challenge skills balance. Okay, so let me explain what that is. If you can imagine an XY axis, okay, on the Y axis, you have how challenging, how hard something is. On the X axis, you have how skilled you are at that thing. Okay. There's kind of a sweet spot between the difference in how challenging something is and how skilled you are at that thing that can put you into a state of flow. You guys want to take a guess at what that percent difference is?
I have no idea.
No.
Right in between. I don't know.
So it's only 4%.
4%. No kidding.
Not much. That is not much. So any more than that, okay, if the challenge is way too above your skill set, you get anxious, fearful, and you can shut down. It's no longer fun, right? If the challenge is too far below your skill set, you're bored. And I think when it comes to sex, a lot of people end up there. Sex has become boring, routine, monotonous, and then they want to spice things up. And maybe they jump to the other side where they go, too big, too fast, or it's uncomfortable, or they don't really maybe understand how taking baby steps can have such a profound effect on our ability to feel absorbed in the moment. And so, that's just kind of one example. And so in that chapter, I look beyond the thing you can do and lead. Well, we talk about that a little bit, but I really try to lead more with things like the feeling you want to have when you make love. It's for humans, we have sex for so many more reasons beyond just procreation, right? And it's not just about physical pleasure. It's about emotional connection. It's about relationship. It can be an opportunity to feel playful, to find comfort, to feel romantic, to explore power. I mean, there's just so many potential facets to the experience. Sometimes leading with the feeling alone can kind of alter the course of the encounter and can be enough to really draw you in. So that's just one example of, I think, the nuance in that chapter and something that people can come back to time and again.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
I am kind of curious, Steve. Emily, so is flow different for men than women in heterosexual couples?
No, there's no, I didn't find any gender difference in my study. Flow state is universal. So in, Csikszentmihalyi's research, he found that, humans are actually hardwired to experience flow. There's even some data to suggest that some animals are hardwired to experience flow. And so I really believe that anybody, when given the opportunity, and of course I want to remind people, we're talking about how to take sex to the next level. If you are in a really dysfunctional relationship, if you have unresolved trauma, if, there are some things that need to be worked out first. So this is more about how to take sex from good to great than it is to take sex from bad to good. So I think when the foundation is there and you want to take it to the next level, that's where some of this flow science can come into play.
That's a Great distinction. Thank you for making that.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, do you have a story, an example, a couple, that has come in and you've been able to kind of help them, see the light and start really living what you're teaching?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so many couples. As soon as I, got the data from the study before I even published the book, I started applying it to my clients, and, I would, explain to them what flow state was. So they kind of had that understanding. As soon as I'm explaining it, they're like, oh yeah, like, we all have that friend who's addicted to the runner's high, or, you play an instrument and you get lost in the music, or, a sport and you're in the zone. I mean, guys especially love sports analogies because I can talk about a team sport. This isn't like an individual thing. Like, in any team sport, they don't have time to stop and talk through every move. There's this attunement, this kind of effortlessness of the team moving as one to help them towards the shared goal. And so everyone's like, oh, okay, yeah, like that concept makes sense. And then I'm like, okay, now let's talk about let's identify what the deficit is in your relationship, and then talk about, what aspect of flow we need to pull from to help you out of the hole. And it's a little bit different for everybody. I think the book, I didn't want it to feel like something that people just kind of read cover to cover and that was it. I really wanted it to live on people's bookshelves so that they could, pull from it depending on what's going on in their life. Like, when you've got young kids and you feel like life is chaotic and you're two ships passing in the night, like the sensuality chapter is all about kind of, quieting that down and getting in touch with the sensations and learning to feel embodied, which is deeper than mindfulness. It's like how to Marie Kondo your sex life. But then when sex has become boring and routine, then the curiosity chapter is there. If I'm working with a couple who is just struggling to find each other again because of a life adjustment or hardship or something like that, then the adaptability chapter is all about that. If there is emotional disconnect, then the vulnerability chapter has a lot of tools. And then the attunement chapter, in many ways feels like the gestalt of the other 4 chapters. It's kind of where everything comes together, and, they're going to pull from some of the best in the other chapters to kind of build that chapter. And, again, talk about how to get into that kind of almost transcendent state. There's such an emphasis on sexual communication, and that's good. Learning to talk about it and to feel comfortable doing so is awesome and will go a long way in helping a couple have a good sex life. But it's a first step. Again, it's like the practice. Again, like going back to the sports analogy, like I hope people can eventually get to the point where they don't have to stop and talk about everything because they've learned how to pay attention to subtle shifts and things like breath and tension, and they're making micro adjustments in real time and, really equal parts, contributing rather in equal parts to the, contribution of pleasure and satisfaction. And so that's all in the attunement chapter.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
Whether that's in bed or outside of bed, right? Yeah. Paying attention to those nuances.
Outside of bed is such a great place to start, and that's another reason why I find this model really great is because, there's so much you can do outside of the bedroom, especially for people who feel too timid to kind of dive right into, applying this to their sex life. There's, in fact, in each chapter, there's 3 subsections. And so I talk about how to experience this as an individual. I didn't want this book to be limited to couples. So it's about how to tap into each quality within yourself, how to cultivate it in your relationship outside the bedroom, and then how to apply it to your sex life. So we kind of work our way there.
Yeah. So in that way, I'm curious, the book, I think, ultimately the best benefit with a couple read it together, but, that doesn't always happen, or someone's not willing to go to a sex therapist like you. Can one person benefit from reading it and saying, okay, and then, discussing it, that type of thing? What do you think?
I think so. I definitely think there's, benefit in, because there's so much you can do on an individual level to change a system, if you want to try. To an extent, I do find in most cases the prognosis is better if everyone is equally invested, in the outcome. So, at some point, if you've got one person who doesn't care at all about improving the quality of the sex life and one person who's like ready to do anything it takes, then that can create a little bit of a disconnect.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
Is there just even just one idea of what we could do outside the bedroom just today, Emily, to start that in motion?
Well, the attunement, the first thing that comes to mind is, let me make it simple. That's kind of a trickier one. So sensuality, right? Like getting in touch with the five senses. We live in a split attention world. Okay. We eat lunch and check our emails. We watch TV and check our social media. We walk the dog and listen to a podcast. Like we're doing two things at once all the time. And it's not realistic to train your brain all day to do two things at once and then expect to be able to turn it off because you decide to do so and then concentrate on sex. I have women in particular who just really struggle to quiet the mind enough to immerse themselves in the sensations of sex. And they're physically there, but their mind is thinking about the laundry in the next room or, did I register my kid for summer camp or, whatever it may be. It's in a million different places. And so a simple thing we can do is start trying to single task, when and where we can, like when you're out for a walk, just go for a walk and notice the sounds of nature and the birds and stop and smell the roses, literally. When you're sitting down for lunch, whether that's by yourself or with someone else, like put the phone on airplane mode and just enjoy the experience of eating, notice the internal experience and, work that, if you can have a conversation, of course, at the same time, I think there's a social element to it, but making little changes like that really can go a long way in quieting the nervous system enough so that when, it is time to have sex, your brain is used to just doing the one thing.
Mm-hmm. It's great advice. Yeah. I love that.
I do too. Yeah, because you're right. I hadn't stopped and think about it. Really, Emily, that almost everything that we do, we're driving, we're listening to the radio. Some people are on their phones. Everything is clamoring for our attention. So it sometimes I'll just turn the radio off and just silence in the cars. And it's just beautiful.
Love that. Yeah. I'm so guilty of it too. And I constantly have to remind myself just to stop and just do the one thing at a time. And it's incredible how much more relaxing that is, especially like when I'm out walking the dog, I don't listen to podcasts and stuff like that anymore. I'm like, I'm just going to enjoy this time outside and fresh air and look around and be in the environment. And, little things can make a big difference.
Mm-hmm. I understand that multitasking or even double, what did you call it? What did you call the two?
Split attention.
Split attention. Thank you. How exhausting that is on the brain.
Oh, it's so exhausting. And then a lot of times we try to add a third thing in and the brain literally can't, it kind of misfires when you try to do three things at once. If you've got dinner going on the stove and, you're trying to also help your kid with their homework and you're adding to the grocery list. I mean, it's just like a lot. And so it's no wonder that at the end of the day, when we'd like to connect with our partner, our nervous systems feel completely fried, and they are. And so, on crazy days like that, even just taking, a few moments before a sexual encounter to do some really deep diaphragmatic breathing. I mean, I've got little kids at home myself. And, I reached a point with my own husband where I was like, I can't just switch it on as easily as I used to. And so, now we take a little extra time just to kind of lay down and relax. And, we're not rushing through anything, which makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're so right about living in just a very busy world. So much clamoring for our attention and our energy. What's your advice to couples about fitting in sex amidst these very busy lives, Emily?
You have to prioritize it just like you would anything else that's important in life. The idea that, great sex can and should always be spontaneous or quote unquote happen naturally is one of the, most widely perpetuated myths. It's not rooted in any research, my own included, and other studies, that look at couples who know how to sustain long-term passion. They all talk about planning it. Now, let me give you my rundown on planning it, because I want to change. People have a lot of, automatic visceral reaction when I start talking about that. Okay, so number one, I prefer the word planned as opposed to scheduled. I just feel like you plan a party and you schedule a root canal. Like there's just a different connotation, and I'm a stickler for the words we use. So we plan it. I like to think of the time we set aside, and it's good to pick a time like around the same time on a weekly basis. But I like to think of that time as being there as a plan B, as a backup time. So you're not closing yourself off for other times. It takes the pressure off that time, because it's not like everyone's just waiting for that moment. Hopefully you're still open to connecting at other times. But if for some reason you don't, at least, the time is there as a backup. Okay. Just because you plan when doesn't mean you have to plan what. So there can still be some room for spontaneity and what goes down when you finally do connect. Alternatively, you can use the fact that you have this time set aside to plan in more detail what you want to do. I mean, again, taking a cue from people like in the kink and BDSM community, there's a ton of planning and preparation that goes into creating these, sometimes elaborate scenes. And, they talk about getting in this like transcendent state because of all the planning and preparation and collaboration that went into it, so that when the time comes around, they can just surrender to the experience. And I think we can take a lesson from them in that regard. So you can, again, you can not plan, or you can use it to plan more. We can always cancel our plans. I never want someone to feel like they're in a relationship with someone who's holding their feet to the fire. For some reason that time rolls around and you are just not in the mood. You have a killer headache. You are too stressed out about a deadline, whatever it may be. Like, that's okay. We can always, I encourage people to find a time, within a day or two to be together. I also, I like to broaden the idea of what sex is. If there's too much pressure on that time to be about intercourse, sex as we typically think about it, that can be off-putting for some people. And so, I tell people that at a minimum, I want you to be giving each other your undivided attention. I want there to be some kind of skin on skin contact. Like, that's it. Ideally you're lying naked in bed together, but even if you're not, like, at least hold hands and touch each other. And maybe you're just having a conversation, but there's that skin to skin contact. Cause if that's not happening ever, it's hard for those pathways to turn on it and do so in a kind of more intense way. It's just like a muscle we have to keep working. And so I tell people to do that. And, lastly, I remind people that when they were dating, they were planning it. Everyone knew what was happening at the end of the night. And there was a lot of excitement and anticipation that went into it. So, we just have to kind of reframe the way we think.
It's really what you're talking about is really adaptability, right? That maybe it's not going to be intercourse.
Right. Exactly. We have, that's all in the adaptability chapter, is learning to think outside the box, learning to rewrite your sexual script, kind of broaden, because there's going to be a point in time, where maybe you've got you're recovering from an injury and you can't get in the same position that you're used to, or, there's just a million different variables that can come into play that may, make it impossible to have sex the way you're used to having it. So you want to be open-minded and flexible, and not literally, figuratively. And that's what the adaptability chapter is all about.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
Yeah, that's great. I wonder, well, both of you, you're both therapists. What's your take on if the sexual relationship is going really well? Does that tend to be a kind of a barometer if the entire, relationship tends to be going better? And if that area is not going well, there may be some of these other areas that are not going well. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'll kind of share my thoughts, and then Liz, I'd love to hear from you. But yeah, I mean, we know from the research that sexual satisfaction is a predictor of relationship satisfaction, and it's a stronger predictor than the reverse. So yeah, to your point, when that area is going poorly or there's conflict, it can spill over into everything. Yeah. Liz, anything you want to add?
Just said it can be a predictor. Like you said, it could be one, right? But not always, because it is so complicated with, aging and stressors and work and children and trauma, life, right? War. I mean, I think so many things can trouble us, and that can affect that connection. But I love all these good thoughts. I really love this planning versus scheduling. I think that's beautiful. Plan to be intimate, even if it's not planning to have intercourse, full blown, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had one couple who they talked about kind of just maintaining this constant energetic charge that they could turn the heat up on, turn the heat up or down, kind of depending, but it was always there, whether it was just a extra cuddle in the morning or choosing to take a shower together, and, a longer kiss, a deeper kiss, things like that just kind of kept some momentum going. And it didn't, like, so many couples, I think, are just guilty of living like two ships passing in the night, and then they expect to have this great sex, and there's going to be a little bit of connection.
Yeah. Single. I mean, they find this helpful as well, Emily, in a couple or singles, is this open to them?
For sure. I mean, I really encourage singles to read the book. Like I said, there's sections within each chapter that talk about how to cultivate the quality within yourself. And, one thing I want to say, these 5 qualities this is not about becoming someone you're not. If you look at babies and young children, okay, they are sensual. They are exploring the world, in and through the 5 senses. They put everything into their mouth. It's about touch and taste. Like, it's all there, right? They're curious. I think 4-year-olds, I cite this in the book, they ask an average of like 400 questions a day. Okay. At middle school, that number drops down to 2. So, they're wanting to know about everything. Their mind is open, and it wants to learn. It wants to evolve. It's dying to make connections. They're adaptable. I mean, kids can be shaped. There's moldability, there's flexibility. The vulnerability, we are, hardwired to attach and be emotional. So much of that is socialized out of us, men in particular. The vulnerability chapter actually kind of focus on a male client, and how we drew that out. Cause, I want sex to feel like more than a juxtaposition of body parts. I mean, it is emotional. And men, they feel that, but they struggle to verbalize it. So, but again, we're all vulnerable, and then we all have the ability to attune. Again, babies attune to their caregivers naturally and automatically. So what I think happens is because of a lot of different reasons, whether it's, our upbringing, gender, socialization, family of origin, trauma, life experience, the impact of culture, religion. I mean, all of this stuff shapes us to a degree, and to an extent cuts us off from some of these qualities. And so this is about removing those barriers, tapping into them again, and feeling connected to them once again, not becoming someone you're not. I really wanted this model to feel customizable and personalized for every individual. So I do think that there is so much work that individuals can do to start to reconnect with each of these qualities within themselves.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Is there a name to your report, Emily, that you found?
To my study.
Uh-huh.
I think it's called Sexual Satisfaction, Exploring the Role of Flow. It's linked on my website.
That's beautiful. I love that. Because we want to make sure that those resources are available to our friends here on Stronger Marriage Connection about their relationship. We're going to add those to our show notes. Is there a place you want us to go, mainly to find you? Possibly work with you?
Everything is on my website. So it's emilyjamea.com. The book is linked there. The research, as I mentioned, is linked there. I have tons of online learning material. I've got, an online workshop that frames the book and everything that was cut from the book itself, like extra exercises and information and stuff like that is available through the workshop. Tons of free resources as well. So lots to check out.
It's really generous of you. And Jamea is Jamea. Very good.
Awesome. Well, Emily, before we let you go, we like to ask all of our guests a couple of questions. The first one, in honor of the name of our podcast, is what do you feel like is a key to a stronger marriage connection?
Avoiding complacency. It is, relationships are alive. And if we want to feel like they are alive, we have to treat them like they are alive, and nurture them. And I think so many couples just take each other for granted and can fall into a kind of set it and forget it mentality, and do that if we want to have a strong marriage. So got to stand.
Yeah, man, it reminds me of something that Dennis Rainey once said, an author. He said that this, at least this natural flow to isolation is what he called it, kind of going down this river. And if you're not really intentionally holding on to each other with a rope together, you'll just naturally float and drift apart without even being mean and nasty. We just get into these ruts or routines instead of the relationship.
It happens so subtly and gradually that suddenly we look up and our partner feels like they're really far away. But there's so much we can do to find each other again. And some ebb and flow is normal in a relationship, but I think, you've always got to keep your eye on your partner and make sure you don't let too much time go by before rekindling.
Yeah, for sure. And this last one, we call it a takeaway of the day. Is there a take home message you want our listeners to remember from our discussion today?
I want people to understand that, sexual health and nurturing sexuality, really filters into so many areas of our life. That people who feel sexually satisfied, have a greater sense of well-being, better psychological health, lower rates of depression, more emotional well-being, stronger relationships. It's not everything, of course. But it's, for most people, it's pretty important. And there's, so much we can do that doesn't take a ton of effort to keep that part of our lives healthy and strong. And doing so goes a long way.
Yeah, it sure does. Wow. What about you, Liz? What's your takeaway of the day with Dr. Emily?
I've said it and I'll just say it again. I love the term planning sex versus scheduling sex. I think I think words are so powerful. And we can plan the when, but be open to the what. So,
yeah.
I love that. Thank you for that, Emily. What about you, Dave? What's your greatest takeaway from our interview today with Dr. Emily Jamea?
Yeah, this has been super helpful. I love this, just the insights. I love vulnerability and adaptability, attunement. I think I was telling Liz not too long ago, this is one of my favorite new words, this attunement, just to be totally locked in. I often tell couples it's lack of attention leads to loss of connection. You've got to be totally locked in and attuned to what's happening, even throughout the day. My thinking, where's my attention? I think that's the golden gift today, is not necessarily time. It's you're all in attention with all these distractions that are going on. So anyway, that word, absolutely love it. I'm glad you included that.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Emily Jamea, thanks again for joining us today. Thanks for all that you're sharing. To our listeners, we will post all the notes, the links and things there in our show notes. So for now, we will say goodbye and we'll see you next time on another episode of the Stronger Marriage Connection podcast.
Thanks again.
Mm-hmm. And remember, friends, it's the small things that create a stronger marriage connection. Take good care for now. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a second to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel at Utah Marriage Commission, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. Be sure to smash the like button, leave a comment, and share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and interact with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Life and Facebook at Stronger Marriage. So be sure to share with us which topics you loved or which guests we should have on the show next. If you want even more resources to improve your marriage or relationship connection, visit strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, e-courses, in-depth webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producer, Rex Polanis, and the team at Utah State University, and you, our audience. You make this show possible. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the Utah Marriage Commission.